looking at trees today for a short while, and in the background up there you can see big mature alders. When we come to winter time, after leaf fall, probably sometime between November and mid-December, I'll be up some of those trees, and when that time comes I'll show you the procedure to coppice a tree of that size right down to the ground, and then we will show you the procedure for turning that large tree into logs. But in the meantime, as we've already done with trees in general, I will show you some of the most important changes that we need to make in relation to trees. Trees are brilliant. They absorb carbon, they provide fertility, they provide fuel, and with the ones that you can see in the foreground here, these are sweet chestnut. I planted about 20 about 3.5 years ago, and about 17 of them are coming up. These sweet chestnut, not only do they provide fuel and fertility from their falling leaves every year, because they're absorbing large quantities of carbon dioxide, they're the best things out as far as climate change is concerned, and at the same time they will provide a very large amount of food once they have matured up to the age of about 8 or 10, between 8 and 12 years. They need to be that size before they start producing their nuts. And chestnuts are one of the best balanced foods for human beings that there is. They're rich in carbohydrates, they're rich in enough protein, they contain virtually everything of a concentrated food. Now these small ones at the moment, in their 4th summer, they are going to be coppiced, most of them in about another 2 or 3 years' time. After that I will be choosing, or in fact before that, I will be choosing 2 or 3 of them which will go on to be mature trees, because when they're this close, which is about 3 meters apart at the moment, when they're this close they will not be able to go to maturity. They need to have more space than that. Those 2 or 3 that I will not coppice in 2 or 3 years' time will be the ones which will become the standard trees, which will go on to produce very large quantities of food, as well as those other important things of energy and fertility. The fertility comes from falling leaves. Every autumn, when a tree loses its leaves, it provides a significant amount of fertility for the ground underneath and just below where they are. And just below this particular one is my upper vegetable garden. So that provides a logical way to increase the fertility of the vegetable garden. This will also be extremely useful for wildlife. I deliberately leave a lot of undervegetation, or undergrowth as they call it, in the early stages of growth, because this is again extremely good for wildlife. So the whole setup is that in a few years' time this will be producing large quantities of food, fertility and fuel from an area about 1/4 of the size, which will provide the same amount of food from any other method, particularly from livestock farming. Livestock farming needs to be replaced largely by trees and tree crops, and this is the major forerunner and the major change which needs to happen on a very large scale in this country, and particularly across all parts of Western Europe. You've just had a look at potatoes I dug yesterday. Going back to what we said last week, the potato fork needs to be strong because you're digging a whole plant. Plenty of depth there, plenty of width. Blunt ends. The blunt ends mean that you're reducing the amount of damage that you're going to do to the plants, to the potatoes as you're digging them. That's the crucial thing about that one. Yesterday morning, all those were in the ground. This fork, the general digging fork, completely different, still strong there, but it's got pointed ends, it's sharp, it's able to go nicely into the ground. So after digging the potatoes, I then use this fork to go over it a second time and then a third time so that it was thoroughly forked over. This is the only time after digging potatoes that we dig the ground. So as I do a 4-year rotation, I only actually dig deeply every 4th year. The vast majority of what we do is a no-dig system. This fork, again, I explained briefly last time. This fork is a dung fork or a manure and compost fork. Again, it's sharp. The outer bits are a little bit shorter. You're able to push this in and get the compost or the manure onto your garden satisfactorily. I don't have manure because I do everything as a vegan gardener, and it's important to me to be able to do everything without having to keep animals, and what we do to animals is another story which I will come to later. We live on a sloping site. I've obviously got an ordinary wheelbarrow which is very useful for all sorts of purposes, with one wheel at the front, and that barrow is used ideally for going along narrow paths and is very manoeuvrable. But because of the sloping site, I have frequently ended up slipping and sliding, bumping on my backside with a load of logs, falling out, and then I have to reload the barrow and of course rub my backside better. So I've invested in a very useful tool, a barrow with 2 wheels. This will take more weight than an ordinary barrow, considerably more. Because of the fact that it's on a sloping site, it doesn't matter, it stays stable. Even when I fill it right up to here with logs, it still doesn't fall over, even when I'm going on a slope like this. Ideal, very useful, but I'd still even recommend it even if you live on fairly flat ground. What we'll talk about next time, but I will introduce you to it briefly this time, is in there I've got some seeds. They're cress seeds, and there's about 300 there. I counted them up this morning. Now in this hand I've got 200 plants. How do you convert that into that? Because this has about 10 times the nutrition of that. These have got all the minerals. These have got all the minerals plus, very importantly, all the vitamins. And also you've enhanced the overall nutrition of those seeds about 50 times just by doing that. Anybody can do this on a windowsill, in the kitchen, anything like that can be done by anybody without a garden. So it's important to know that. We normally do it in the winter if we get short of greenery foods. But at this time of the year I bought this from our local shop, 26p, those seeds about 1 penny. That's the difference between the two.